Thank you all for having me. This is going to be a little hard for me to stay in this little stage. I'm like a walk-arounder, so we're gonna try and make this work. But please feel free to engage with us today. We've got a lot of really unusual science to share with you and some different perspective about this thing that we all do every day, right? We all communicate constantly, but there's a whole science behind communication that we haven't really learned. So we're going to look into that some more today. First of all, when we think about science, I want us to all anchor in the awareness that what we believe from science creates our whole worldview. Whatever we believe, it's like a filter that we look through. And the world that we all see, we don't all see the same world. We all see things through the filters and the lenses that we've placed over our belief system. And science really shapes a lot of those. We can see this if we look back in history for a minute. And we think about, being a medical patient in the 1600s. Is anybody eager to go to a doctor in the 1600s? Right? If you lived back then, it was a little shocking how they would treat us, right? They used to think that blood held sickness, so they would use leeches to remove blood when you were sick, and usually it would just make things worse, right? But if you were a citizen of that day, you really believed you were getting the best care, and that was the right thing to be doing, and you were totally wrong. And I want us to all know that we can look back at history all the time and see, oh, look at how wrong they were and look how wrong they were. And please know that today they're going to do the same thing about us right now. There's a lot of things in the way that we look at the world where our science just hasn't graduated enough. And just like we can look at the doctors in the 1600s and kind of cringe of what were they thinking, we're in a similar paradigm where science is going to keep evolving us. Let's think about this. Did you know that once upon a time, doctors didn't wash their hands, right? That wasn't a thing before we understood germ theory. And it's fascinating to spend a minute on the history of hand washing. And how did hand washing become a thing in this world? It was actually this Hungarian doctor named Semmelweis. And he was noticing that there were a fellow surgeon died when they were performing an autopsy when he had had a cut on his hand. And there was a problem in these hospitals of women, specifically women giving birth. They died at really, really high rates. And Semmelweis started noticing, we're in the morgue in the morning and then we deliver babies in the afternoon. I wonder if we washed our hands, and we never wash our hands in between, right? So maybe there's some kind of juice on our hands or something that's going from the dead bodies into the moms and killing them. And he was right. But this is before we had full germ theory and things. He discovered this and published on this in 1847 through 1860. When they adopted it at the Hungarian hospital where he taught, death rates plummeted. But then he was actually exiled from that hospital. Because even though he was saving hundreds of lives, doctors didn't like the thought that they were the ones who were responsible for people dying. To suggest that it was their own hands that carried something on them was such an attack of their ego that there was something that I'm doing that is causing the problem, that they rejected his entire science. And I want to ask you this. How long did it take for hand washing to become mandated in American hospitals? He published on this in 1860. How long does it take our world to recognize scientific advancements and universally adopt them for our good? Come on, give me some guesses of when we mandated hand washing in America. 1920s maybe? Yeah, 1980. Yeah, check me. Terrifying, right? We don't even now, doctors don't, we don't even breathe on anyone, right? We don't even let our kids eat lunch without washing their hands, right? The thing that we all need to know is that we trust doctors, we trust science, but science is always learning so much more that it completely changes what it knows and completely changes the rules. And it can really take society a long time to catch up. So if we are professional, intellectual people in this world, we need to be aware that this is a dynamic of science and that our society is always going to keep experiencing this same phenomenon. What is it that people in the future are going to say, can you imagine living in 2025 when they still believed fill in the blank? How are future generations going to finish that? So you're really ahead of the game if you live anchored in the awareness that science is going to keep changing so much of what we know. Now, they called this term, the term that you all want to adopt into yourself, is that of being intellectually humble. This, like, put this on your resumes, and this is a good skill to have in teaching, that I am not so gullible that I believe anything, or so stubborn that I'm never going to consider new information. But I'm right here in the middle of this spectrum, recognizing that there's constantly new scientific discovery and information, and it's important for me to stay humble in my intellectualism and realizing I need to change. You know, the doctors in Semmelweis's days had no intellectual humility. They looked at that and said, if this science says what it does, then that's saying that I'm at fault, and I don't want to accept any fault or that I've been doing anything wrong, so they rejected that science. Now, I might show you some things about communication that you're doing that are not necessarily ideal in the way that you're communicating. And it doesn't mean that you are at fault or that you are bad because you've been communicating this way before. This is new science. These are new things that we didn't know. And so there are things we're going to go through today where they might be a change to the way that you thought about how that language worked and what was really happening when we communicate that way. So the key here is just to stay flexible. You want to stay an expert, you want to stay smart, but you always want to stay flexible and know that there is always more to know. There's always more science for us to be understanding, and we benefit ourselves, our teams, our businesses, our world better when we stay flexible to how much more there is to learn. So today we're going to go through a lot of different things related to communication, but really anchoring on 3 specific communication science shifts to make in your mind around what's really happening when you communicate. And the first is to recognize that communication forms perception, and perception is reality. What we perceive is reality. And that's not how I was raised. I was raised that there's like definitive reality and then all of these other things. But let me explain a bit what I mean. Now, what really happens when we're communicating, like on the inside, right? What's really going on with people? Well, we have changes in states of awareness and consideration. It makes us think, right? It can also be something that creates an emotional state, like we're laughing or we're happy or we're crying. But really, it creates and shapes our reality by shaping our perceptions, our decisions, and actual physical matter. All right, what am I talking about here? Let's imagine that you want to stop cars from driving fast in front of your house. How are you going to change the reality in your area of cars traveling quickly? Usually I share this with other communication and public relations professionals, and we think about what kind of signs we could put up and how we can tell people, you know, all these different ways of communicating that we need to change something. And of course, words are a beautiful form of communication. We can put down all kinds of signs. But perception creates reality. So I love this meme. This 74-year-old man wanted to slow traffic in front of his house, so he stood out there with a hairdryer and a hazard vest, and now his house is on Waze as a speed trap, and no one speeds past this man's house, right? This gentleman understood, if I just get people to perceive that this is a place where you shouldn't speed, they won't speed. They will change their behavior. People's behavior changes, and your behavior changes all day, every day. There's in kind of pop psychology, there's a book out right now that a lot of people appreciate, and I'm one of them, called the Let Them Theory. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. Really based on this premise that we cannot change other people. And that couldn't be further from the truth. We are changing people all day, every day. But change is a spectrum. There's really hard change, and then there's quick little easy change, like getting somebody to slow down in that area. And it's important if we recognize that when we are communicating, we really are changing people constantly and shaping this perception and this reality. Let's look at another way that we all are kind of subconsciously processing and making decisions using some of this subjective forms of reality. When we see this logo here, right? It conveys all kinds of different subconscious somatic cues when we're processing images and visuals. Now, if you look at these two pieces side by side, right? Do you want to have this run your IT operations if it looks like this? Right? There's all kinds of things that just happened in your decision-making brain just based on semantic, visual types of cues. What is that whole system? That's what I'm going to show you the wiring of today, of what's really going on that makes us automatically have a feeling and a choice and a decision and a whole host of communication assets attached to something, one versus the other. Well, first of all, why are we processing in our subconscious mind? That's a really important thing for us to get to, first of all, is understanding where and how our mind does and processes communication. First of all, are you aware of the fact that you have about 70,000 thoughts a day and make, on average, 35,000 decisions every day? And then depending on where we live, we hear it's estimated between 7,000 and 50,000 marketing messages per day. Right, just walking in here, I passed at least 50. They're all over signs. They're in the parking lots. They're everywhere. And our mind is a beautiful, powerful thing that is constantly processing all of that incoming information. But it's not just all of that in all of our thought world. We also are living in an age where we have a crushing amount of incoming information. I would say that this stat's not even accurate anymore. A few years ago that they said we consume 5 times as much information as we did 50 years ago. We get tap, click, swipe 2,600 times a day, 13 robocalls, 126 emails, 94 texts, and 65 to 80 phone notifications on average per day is what we're all dealing with, right? So what this does to a brain is it puts it in a state of what's called cognitive overload. This is where our conscious working memory, the thing that's looking at me right now, can only process so much. So our subconscious mind starts taking over and making more and more and more of our decisions for us. Like we look at those 2 logos and we just instantly know that's not the one for me. My mind has too many other things to think about, so I'm going to make that decision really, really quickly. But you made it based on a whole bunch of cues and communication that has also been architected for you, and important for us to understand that. What science says is that when it comes to making decisions, we used to think that we used our thinking, rational brain to make decisions, but really, we're only using this brain to make 1 to 5% of decisions. 95 to 99% of our decisions are made in our subconscious mind. We are in such states of engagement and busyness, we really need that mind to help us process. Remember, 35,000 decisions a day, right? You need your brain to do that. Or if you were trying to consciously process everything in your environment, you would be so overwhelmed you couldn't function, right? So now that we know some of those bases and those foundations, what comes next? Well, as I mentioned, communication creates change. Please anchor in this. This is a very important shift because a lot of our world right now thinks it's just communication, I'm just talking to you. What's the big deal? It's just some words. And I'm here to show you today why that is not the case at all. We are actually shaping the health and the decisions and the behavior of one another with the way that we choose to communicate. We know this in the world of PR and marketing. It's not new to us that change is what communication is. We are measured in our industry against things called the Barcelona principles from different groups that set standards on international standards of communication excellence. And if you are effective in the world of marketing and communication, nearly every measure comes back to determining how good were you at changing someone's perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors. This is what we are doing. We actually are affecting and shaping people's entire inner processes. And we think that we aren't, though, because we consider change to be something that is really hard, that's really a long, arduous, big process. But that's not true at all. Change is natural and easy. Think of the grandpa with the hairdryer. Was that hard for him? It wasn't hard to change the reality of what was happening for him traffic-wise in the slightest, right? So we tend to think change is hard, always describing it that way. I want you to break up with that worldview. I want you to recognize and embody that change is happening constantly, and that if you are communicating, you are constantly changing other people. And how do you involve yourself in that responsibly? So let's get some more proof, though, that am I right here? Is change really easy? Well, tell me, when was the last time that anybody got mad or sad when you got upgraded to first class on a plane? Is that a change that was upsetting, right? Or if your hotel reservation was upgraded to a better room, right? We have such this way of saying change is hard, change is negative. It's not. We need to break up with that worldview and recognize that change is our natural way of being. The kinds of change that we aren't too fond with are things that are called reductive change or additive change, right? If we have change that creates a loss or an absence or change that overwhelms us or manipulates us, there are a lot of forms of communication change that we are using nowadays in marketing that are reaching the end of their life cycle because of how science is becoming aware of what's really going on in that subconscious brain and what's really happening. Another, though, that I have to sit with, proof of change being so supportive. Does anybody live during the day of paper maps versus GPS maps? I lived in Europe when I was 18 with a backpack and a book. I cannot fathom sending my kids or even myself going there now without that kind of technology, right? We appreciate these types of change, but how do we incorporate that in our language? All right, so now we're going to get into the science. This is where things get a little more meaty and where we're going to spend the majority of our time looking at the concepts around when we are changing people. What science has realized is that we can tune the way that we are changing to create different psychological, neurological, and physiological states. We are literally creating the health of others through communication. Okay, now why am I saying all this? Well, first of all, this is what's called a convergence science approach. You're going to hear, if you study the sciences, convergence science being applied to many and many more fields in our world, especially the way AI helps us with computing and bringing in different worldviews and different scientific perspectives into research. But convergence science is basically saying, we normally look at something from this one silo of science, but I want to look at what all these other silos of science have to say about it and converge that all into one viewpoint. And then what new systems reveal themselves? What new ways of understanding this big topic happen when I don't just look at it from a social science perspective, but also physics and ecology and economics, and I bring in all of these different worldviews. Is anybody a communications major or study communication in school? Right? It's a social science field primarily, but really it's humanities, it's physical nature, it's science, it's so many of these different areas that are really all present in creating the actual scientific equation of what's happening when we communicate. All right, so instead of sitting with all these words, though, I want to boil it down to what the scientists have to say that is the big change. We always used to think that we were thinking machines that feel, but we are not. We do not think first. We feel first. We are feeling machines that think. So all the communication that you're creating, this is a massive paradigm shift in communication and in us understanding what's happening when we're engaging one another, is that we are not just throwing information that is bouncing off of you. We are creating affect. We are creating feeling that literally sculpts and shapes your thoughts and behaviors and your health. Let's spend a bit of a minute with this, because this is important of how this changed. So remember, we're talking about the doctors in the 1600s and how we don't want to be taken care of by them. Well, right now we still technically live under a paradigm in our entire economic and business world that's from the 1800s called rational man theory. So there's a man who decided everybody's rational. Like, you make decisions based on your own personal self-interest. And anytime you're going to make a decision, you sit here and you go through your brain, what's best for me? And that's how I'm going to make the decision. And that's what someone in the 1800s decided is how humans make decisions. And everybody agreed. And so about in the 50 years ago or so, we had a field that started to grow called behavioral economics. Anybody heard of that, or the behavioral sciences? So what happens if you're a scientific researcher and you're going to start studying things and you find things that are contrary to the belief of the day, you have to say, if everybody believes rational is all that we are, then if you find things to the contrary, you have to frame them as proof that we're irrational. Does that make sense? Right? Everything's on this spectrum of man is rational. And so now we've had 50 years of the behavioral sciences and behavioral economics discovering all kinds of proof to the contrary, that we actually aren't rational. And that entire industry has codified all of its findings as what we call cognitive biases, the ways that we are all broken and flawed and error prone. Because remember, there was this previous belief about rationality that they had to disprove. But now we're here in 2025, 2026. And what we have when we can drone up over these sciences, and what scientists at universities that practice convergent science and such are doing, are droning up over this and saying, hang on, wait a second. Rationality was never the right yardstick. And we're all doing ourselves a great disservice if we look at everything that the behavioral sciences have discovered and say that it's proof of how you're messed up, instead of this is the proof of and the actual instinct network of how we function. It's the control panel of human behavior. So we're going through this very big shift right now to move into what we call the age of affect. Instead of thinking of communication and of human behavior as that of rational or irrational, what we understand is that we are all, when we communicate, engaging with behavioral affect system that shapes decision making. This summer, I was speaking at the Society for Consumer Psychology, and like Martin Luther style, we had this door up here of how we are in an age of going through a reformation of reason. The way that we think people make decisions is completely changing. Like the doctors in the 1600s believed one thing, and we know things to be very, very different. Brace yourselves that the whole industry of understanding how we make decisions and think and feel and how that whole process is influenced is going through a complete and radical scientific revolution as well, a reformation of reason. To understand that we actually we aren't cognitive beings or behavioral beings, but that are in a state of affectism. If you like to read scientific studies, Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley, UCLA, Carnegie Mellon, and another 30 or so universities came together recently to publish a paper on affectivism and how we all have to graduate our understanding of what's really going on when we engage, to not just be that of I'm sending random messages to some biased behavioral system, but that I am affecting and shaping your health process. This brings us into an age of what we call affective intelligence. So like we've got intellectual intelligence or emotional intelligence. We can now enter this age of affective intelligence where you can really intimately understand how are you affecting others? How are you affecting the health of your organization with the way that you're communicating? And as we understand more of this science too, we're going to spend a little time today looking at how you could affect significant harm for your organization if you continue to use language in what we now call indiscriminate influence ways. Because now that we know more about what communication is doing, we can't use it in the same mechanisms without causing harm. Another big, giant, fun textbook word I want to just plant in your mind is psychoneuroimmunology. Has anyone heard of Dr. Gabor Maté? He's kind of famous right now as a New York Times bestselling author who wrote The Myth of Normal and Scattered Minds and a whole bunch of different books. What's really interesting about this man is he's a medical doctor who, after finishing his medical career, he went and he became a psychologist and added in a full understanding of what's going on from that perspective. And he has coined some of these new field terms, psychoneuroimmunology. The way that I psychologically and neurologically activate you shapes your immunology, your health. Are you more likely to develop an autoimmune disease? Has to do with the amount of stress. And much about the amount of stress that you deal with has to do with the affects in your environment and the way that you are processing. So psychoneuroimmunology now tells us the key of this word. You don't have to remember this word, but you do just have to remember that words and affect and engagement create health. They create states of ease and they create states of dis-ease. And if with our communication, we are constantly putting people in states of dis-ease, states of stress, we now know that to not be an inconsequential action. It's not the way that we're supposed to do marketing, to just keep electrocuting stress in people, as a lot of marketers believe is the right form of communication. We now know that to do that, we are negatively affecting the health of our receiver. And everything is a loop, so we're negatively affecting ourselves as well. And psychoneuroimmunology, it's not just individual health, it is immune health concepts. This applies organizationally, in team culture, in society. How well our group immune systems function is how well we're able to collaborate and have relational flexibility and civil discourse, all kinds of things that we really want. So let's make it simple for a minute. Has anybody seen the kids' movie Inside Out? Yeah, all right. This is such a great movie. If you haven't seen it, I don't care if you have kids or not, see this movie, okay? It's incredible. What they do in this movie is they imagine what's going on the inside of our brain, okay? So we have all these different characters. We have sadness, we have joy, we have anger, we have all these different folks, and they're in front of this giant dashboard control panel the whole time of the movie, right? They're right in here inside our brain, and anytime the human, Riley is her name, that they live inside is going to do something, they're moving all these dials and levers. You see all the things down here on the control panel, right? This is what we all need to start doing now, is to think about when we communicate, we are behind this control panel. There is a huge control panel of human behavior, and we are having this direct of an effect, shaping behavior, influencing choice, creating change in matter. You are a control panel of behavioral affects. You are a manager of that. And now the exciting thing is you get to involve yourself in it. It's not just communicating for the sake of communication. You now know how you can affect and pull these dials and buttons differently, so we change how people think and feel and how they behave, who they become. This control panel has lacked labels before, and that's been a little problematic, right? So a lot of us think that it doesn't even exist, but then when we are engaging with it, since we don't really have any labels, what's been happening is I want you to see all of these different buttons and all these different things, as some of you are, I can tell, have really seen a lot of the studies from behavioral sciences over the years where they discover some new bias or some new way we behave. Those become then a new button on the board. And what's happening right now is that we're in this age of indiscriminate influence where we don't really know that these things all work together this way and what all that wiring is. So anybody learning anything in marketing right now, a lot of the teachers are people who found one button and they're writing a big article saying, push the daylights out of this and it works really, really well. And what's happening over in the sciences is we're saying, well, what's the wiring behind that? Why does that work really well? Oh, that one only works really well because it puts you in a state of extreme stress. It puts you in a state of extreme dis-ease. And so is it really right, not just morally and ethically, but is it right for the long-term success of your program for you to keep pushing that particular button? So anchor here in the fact that we've got this new control panel of human behavior, and that is tremendous power. But with great power, of course, comes great responsibility. We can't indiscriminately push these buttons anymore in the way that we used to, not only because it harms people, but because I'm not the only person talking about this and helping people start to know this. Consumers are starting to understand this too. And as consumers start to become aware, they are starting to realize where they are being emotionally manipulated and where communication is crossing lines that before it was like no problem, we can say all these things in marketing and nobody has any issue, right? But we can't walk up to people on the street and name call. We know that that is bad faith communication. Well, in our world, there's a lot more things that we as marketing communication professionals have been having as just normal communication patterns that are moving into an age of being understood as not acceptable, not ethical or civil forms of communication because of the affect that they are really having. Let's look at some specifics. So I want to teach you today some specific ways to change your language to have a more positive affect. And then I want us to spend a little bit of time too looking at some of the examples of what not to say. Because it's kind of hard to start to imagine, how do I really put this all together? But then when you see it said in the negative frame or in a negative affect, it comes together really quickly. So first of all, these control panel dynamics, you all have another new title for yourselves. You are, if you communicate to one-to-many, if you design software, if you decide how a chat engine speaks, you are a one-to-many communicator, which means that you are a choice architect. Has anybody heard that title before? You are always architecting choice when you are communicating. You are not just haphazardly putting together a page or haphazardly deciding, what's going to make this person feel good. We really are architecting choice. I highly recommend this book. Richard Thaler, Nudge, is the book that kind of coined this term and helping us all understand that, hey, the way that we design and present choices really has an impact on decision making. It really does change how people behave. Now, there was a very important, very scientific study to prove this. Now, before we get into this, how many of you have had urinals on the wall in presentations, right? This is a little not normal, but this is one of the most celebrated first examples of nudge, so I have to show you this. So what they were wanting to do is figure out, how do we change behavior in the Amsterdam train station? Yeah, can you picture the men's room at the Amsterdam train station? It wasn't a clean space. They had an issue with what they called spillage, and they wanted to reduce spillage. And so the nudge scientist who said, all right, we're architecting choice here. It's not that I just need the brain to understand you're a filthy animal, point into the middle, stop getting stuff all over the ground, right? The mind knows all that. That's not what's going to change behavior. So what can we do to try to nudge someone to change their behavior? And can you see in this picture what they did? They got a hyper-realistic sticker of a fly and stuck it at the bottom of the urinal. And what do you think happened? Now, in science, when we're going to do a study, we hope for 10% change is that's big, right? We proved something really big. They reduced spillage 80%. 80%, just giving someone something to aim at, right? There are fly stickers, by the way, for sale online. I don't remember the URL, but if you look for it, they have targets around them. It's like a whole industry now. So what does this teach us, though? That there is this whole concept of a way to communicate that is called nudging behavior. These ways of designing communication so that we want to change, so that change is more enjoyable. A really great example of nudging in a conscious way is using a behavioral affect that we call contrast. Has anybody ever been contrasted with your neighbors, with the energy bills, these types of things? Do you like them? I don't necessarily like them, but they do affect behavior significantly. They are 8 times more effective at reducing your energy usage than other forms of intervention that marketing and communication professionals had to us before. If we're going to offer you a rebate or some kind of discount, 8 times more effective if I just compare and contrast you with those in your community. Another nudge that I really think is powerful for us to think about, especially when we're in software, is H&R Block and FAFSA partnered to help autofill forms with available tax data for those that were applying for college. And what they found is there was a whole 8 percentage points more likely that you would attend college if you were filling out a FAFSA form and your H&R Block data was able to autofill. There's significantly more people in college because of the way they just had the form fill out to simplify that behavior and nudge them to be able to continue and to complete. So I want you to keep that image in your mind of the inside out control panel dashboard. I can't copyright that one, of course, obviously. And there's a lot more to it. So this is a quick little glance for you at what all these different behavioral affects are, right? Because there's all different types. We have things that relate to motivating us and things that increase how much we remember things. And I want to give you a few examples of some of these so that as you're thinking about communication, you know which dials to start to turn in order to make your engagement more effective. Can you guys see that, or is that white too light? First of all, one of the most common affects that we all know is speaking in the key of what we call fear, right? Who hasn't heard of fear marketing? This is our top #1 used because it's that red button that everybody knows works real well, so they push the daylights out of it, right? But we are all seeing, and what's wonderful to see in the research is how much fear is starting to not be an effective mechanism of engagement. Fear, scarcity, and urgency are the 3 survival pain triggers that we primarily use across marketing. And there are entire organizations, some that are not too far from me, that certify people to be very, very, the most effective kind of communicators. And all they're actually really doing to them is teaching them how to make a message that is entirely pushing the buttons of fear, scarcity, and urgency. And I'm so glad that these days are that's going to be going into the dark ages, that we are getting into an age of light where we can all start to see that that may be effective, but it is not ultimate effectiveness. Let me give you a really crass example that will stay with you forever. Okay, anybody parents? Okay, we have to teach our kids that fire is hot, right? So am I a clever girl if I say, oh my gosh, I learned that if I just stick my kid's hand in the fire for a while and like let the top layer melt off, like they totally like it hurt and now they remember and they're never gonna touch it again. And aren't I the smartest? No, I'm a monster, right? We have moral parameters around hurting people is not the way that is right to teach. But none of that is infiltrated into marketing and communication yet because we have not understood this behavioral affect control panel. And now that we do, we are going to see a significant decrease in the overuse of fear and scarcity and urgency, especially essentially trying to burn people or electrocute them into a yes. Now, it wasn't too long ago, we're in Denver, it wasn't too long ago that this is what it looked like out the window, okay? We were settling this country and only surviving because we were doing so in community, right? But we all work together. And that's really entrenched in us. And another one of these buttons that's really important for us to engage with is understanding we like to see and understand things in the context of our society, what we call social proof. If I give you a message and I tell you this is what everybody is doing, you are a full 0.25% more likely, 25%, 6% more likely to participate in that information. If I personalize that social proof to you, you're even a full 1/3 more likely to do that. So we know in marketing, we want to use all kinds of social proof, whether it's reviews or statistics or stories or any of these types of details. But I want to make sure you understand, because we're seeing a lot of mistakes in this, is that people are starting to say, okay, I can use this affect, social proof. And they're going out and they're saying things that are in a negative social proof sense. There was a study done on this at the Arizona Petrified Forest, where scientists put up a sign and they said, what's going to happen if we tell people what other people are doing? We want to get people to steal less. So what happens if we tell them, and what they put on the sign is, many past visitors have removed petrified wood from the park, stealing your heritage one small piece at a time. Right? They're telling everybody what's being done and don't do this. But instead what happened is that they tripled theft by telling everybody what not to do. Right? If you say, hey, she's taking it all, turns out that I'm not going to be over here saying, well, she's terrible. I'm like, I got to go get mine too, right? Because there's not going to be any left. So really we need to be careful when we're using social proof. Do know it's so great to frame what people are doing in context of society. But if we do that negatively, it's telling people what not to do. So another one of the keys that's really powerful to sit with is the key of you. Tuning your language and using the word you throughout your content is incredibly powerful. Like, think about as you're composing your message, it's like a musician tuning an instrument so that it sounds more harmonious. If you use you statements, make it very clear what is in it for the receiver, personalizing details that align with their identity, we are far more likely to receive a positive response. So you can achieve your goal with this step. Or as a busy parent, you know how challenging this can be. What are the types of you messages that are empowering and engaging? We see this in marketing with the shareability of content. When we have you in subject lines or incorporated in articles, the engagement rate is exponentially higher. So really do anchor in this particular word. Use the word you as much as you possibly can. Another key word, an affect state, is to create what we call unity effect, or speaking in a key of we, a key of connection. This makes messages far more relatable and agreeable. We have this, what in the sciences, we have this belongingness hypothesis, right? That we have a fundamental need to belong to groups, to belong to a community, right? Remember the wagon train picture? It was just a few generations ago that I had to be with a tribe of people in order to survive. I couldn't go strike out on my own and just set up my own house over here on the prairie and I'll work out water and security and all those things myself. No, we had to be in a collective in order to be safe. And our subconscious mind that's making all of those decisions is still highly wired to be connected and in that state of community. So how are we engaging that in our audiences? How are we creating, as we say, a favorable state of mind by creating a shared sense of identity? So there's a lot of different words we can use to deepen that identity, such as, we, us, family. Warren Buffett was once asked what he would do or what will happen to Berkshire Hathaway when he dies. Now, if you're a communication and PR person and you have to write the response to that, that's a really laden communication that could cause a lot of crisis. And actually what was written and what they said was the sentence down here. It started with him saying, I will tell you what I would tell my children and my family. And it was actually celebrated as one of the most successful pieces of financial communication because he brought everybody right into the family of, it's natural for us to talk about this within my family, so I'll speak to all of you as if you are my family. And it immediately neutralized, why is someone talking about what happens when this big leader dies or what happens to this stock price, things a lot like that. Now, I mentioned earlier, now that we are understanding this dashboard, now that we know what these buttons mean, we are changing from this age that we have been in and are having more awareness around the fact that we have been in an age of indiscriminate influence, where a lot of us are choice architects and we don't even know that we are. We're shaping behavior, we're influencing people, we don't even realize that we're doing it. And that age is ending. There are a lot of organizations and groups, and I'm not saying this to scare you, but I want you to understand the risk. I want you to realize that this is not just some nice new fluffy comms information and have fun with it, and you can be a little more effective or not if you want. I want you to understand that there is significant risk coming if we continue communicating and engaging, especially in marketing and software design, if we aren't aware of what's happening. So has anyone seen the film The Social Dilemma or heard of this? It's on Netflix. Highly recommend watching this, from a group called the Center for Humane Technology. And they have a group called the Consilience Project that publishes a lot of really fascinating content around this. But what this documentary did so great is it explained how all those behavioral scientists over on the East Coast and at all their different universities, as they discovered, look at all these buttons. They got on planes and went to Silicon Valley. And they trained software developers at Meta and Amazon. How do you code software in order to keep people addicted? Here's what we know. Here's what we know about human behavior. And they didn't mean to say, go addict everyone, but by sharing, here's all the buttons. When we then design around all of those buttons, we are addicting people. We are having a massive puppeting of human behavior. And there's all kinds of groups and nonprofits and think tanks and so many places that have come up in the last few years to try to change our world because of this, that are realizing that the way that we have encoded software based on the indiscriminate use of behavioral affects is harming our children, and it is harming us. It is having a very, very detrimental effect. They go as far as to say that it is checkmate on humanity. It is harming us to such degrees. Another interesting fact is that right now, Meta and Amazon, there are antitrust lawsuits. In the Meta case, it is for the use of ephemeral content. So there's a lawsuit against them for how they are using content that expires, so that you've got to run and see it real quick or you're going to lose it. And simultaneously, all over every marketing magazine website and educational source teaching us how to be effective communicators are all these headlines about how we should be using ephemeral content. Do you guys see the disconnect there? Right? So regulatory and science bodies are realizing what these communication methods are doing and how they are problematic, and it is not caught up with industry. We are not, in industry, are not realizing, and in the education of marketing professionals, hey, this thing that we're doing, just because it gets more eyeballs, it's still the equivalent of burning someone's hand, and it's not the right way to do that. And that is why 42 states are suing Meta for behavioral manipulation, and the media are still teaching us to perform and market that exact same way. If you do like these types of studies, this one actually has not been published. It's a working paper that just came out, but it is table stakes for us as marketing and communication professionals, especially in the age of AI. That Harvard really is laying bare what emotional manipulation looks like now that we have AI companion language. So now that we have computers that have conversational engagement with us, it's making effective manipulation much more clear. We're able to see it. So regulating bodies and people who work in software and marketing, all of us, are now actually facing an age where the use of this is a punishable design variable. The use of some of these communication affects is a punishable design variable. If you use some of the language I am going to show you, if we keep engaging people indiscriminately, it will be to the detriment, if not death, of our businesses and our careers. We can't keep communicating the way that we used to. Now, I want to end us, as I showed you some things that we do say, I have a number of slides here to leave you with, and I'll give you all these slides. I don't know if Sarah, do you get them from here? I put in more than we probably can go through because I want you to be able to sit with, in your own time too, in your own behavioral affect zone, sit with how these things make you feel, Have you experienced these kinds of messages and giving you examples of what we now no longer do when we are designing with affective intelligence? These new rules of engagement. So it used to be manipulation is just, it was an accident, right? Now it is a design feature. It is not a side effect. So whether that's FOMO, outrage marketing, guilt marketing, what we call these are dark UX patterns, right? And they aren't just the ways that we talk. They are now identified as dark patterns. So there might be ways you're communicating that you really have in your 1,600 doctors' belief system that this is the right way to do it. And I'm going to disrupt some of that, is that we now know many of these things are actually dark patterns that are biologically hijacking our body, and so we can't keep them going. Here's another real important reason why, though. Something called psychological reactance. Consumers are getting real smart real fast. And the more that we all understand what's happening, the less likely and more we are to keep receiving it. So if you're a consumer and you experience any of the things I'm about to show you, any of these messaging styles, what that Harvard working paper showed, which is so powerful for any of us in software design, is how directly it leads to customer churn, discontinued use, perceived legal liability, like how likely are they to try to actively sue you and get other people to sue you, and spread negative word of mouth calling for boycotts and things like that. So a lot of this language I'm going to show you will be like, this is the normal way that marketing is done, and it's not the normal way marketing is done anymore because we have these new rules of affective intelligence. I want you to think of how we talk about it in our agency is that we are all affectivists. I am having an affect on you. I am shaping you, and I want to use that affectivist power very responsibly. All right, so what are some of the new rules of engagement? This one should be obvious, but it's so not. No lying. Now, does anybody really think of yourselves as lying in your marketing? Probably not, but it is proliferating and it is everywhere, and especially in the age of AI. It's when personalization is just a fabricated connection. The AI complement and correct scan. The process where it's this generic flattery of, and we see some of the AI marketing agencies teaching how to do this, where the whole funnel is that you say, oh, I've been just admiring your social media. It's looking so good, but actually there's 3 things I know that you could do to improve it. And I've made a custom thing just for you. And you guys all know what I'm talking about here. You get these types of messages, right? That hyper-personalization, that's a lie. Did you really go and look at that person's site? Is any of that personalization true? And if it's not, that is manipulation, hyper use of manipulation to the point of being unethical, to being a negative behavioral affect. What are some more? Shame, incorrect behavior cues. Now, as you're looking at these, I want you to think about, when have you been on the receiving end of this? Have you ever heard this in a sales script or seen this as the button choice, those types of things? And how did it make you feel? Did it make you want to buy that product more, or did it repel you from that? Let's imagine all these examples I'm going to show today. I want you to imagine that you're looking at a wellness product, some kind of health company, maybe weight loss or vitamins or whatnot. So part of how we are hyper manipulating emotion is with what we call incorrect behavior cues, where it's just telling someone that they're behaving wrong. You're still thinking about it? Well, successful people don't hesitate. Or you're really going to walk away from this opportunity again? Don't be the person who quits right before it finally works. If you really cared about your health, you'd sign up already. Do you guys hear that? These are the types of things that we say now and are not acceptable forms of behavioral affect. Fear-loaded future questions are another. What if you never change? How will you feel when it's too late? These types of scarcity and manufactured urgency affect. Oh my goodness, this is such a huge one. We only have 3 spots left and they're going fast, and it's a digital thing where there's an unlimited amount. If you leave this page, this discount is gone forever, you'll never see it again. You either decide now or We'll never speak to you again for the rest of history. This is your last shot. And then you refresh the page tomorrow, and there it is again. And the webinar is in another 30 minutes again. And it's a constant lie. We have been able to, and I say we, in the collective we of marketing, behave that way for a long time, and that age is over. We cannot manufacture these urgency affects. Does anybody shop on Etsy? I think they are like one of the biggest examples I have of annoyance around this is that there's a digital product, a digital download of some kind of sticker, unlimited amount, and constantly saying, it's in 5 other people's carts, you better hurry, right? I want you to think of a cattle prod, electrocuting thing. Every time you see one of those messages, that's what they're doing. They're trying to electrocute and jolt that behavioral affect in you. And it's not right for them to do, and it's not right for us to manufacture that in our communication either. Another we have is belonging and validation leverage, where you try to manipulate people by weaponizing belongingness. Belongingness becomes the bait. Like, our community is really only for people who want to evolve. When you join, you'll finally get surrounded by the right kind of high vibe people that are like you. This is your chance to prove that you're serious, right? This kind of language. So what it's really doing is weaponizing that belonging affect. Everybody's heard of this term, of course, gaslighting. How do we have gaslighting and the rewriting of rationality and reality appearing in our communication? We say things like, you're not scared, you're just resisting your greatness, or discomfort is just your old self dying, right? This is teaching people to invalidate their genuine affective experience, replacing their self-awareness with whatever programmed obedience we want them to perform. We don't want people to leave states of autonomy. I was in a call with you should feel so sorry for anybody who tries to cold market things to me. I mean, can you imagine what I do to them? And in a call with someone who was doing all of these, every part of their script was all of this. And at the end, really trying to hyper push that sale. And I finally let him know like where I am and who I am and what I'm doing, and that you're not going to push me on this. And how do you feel okay doing this? And he said, I know what's better for you than you know for yourself. I know what my training really does. And so I know, so it is ethical for me to force you to make a decision in the context of this call, because you'll be better off, because I know what's better for you than you. And no, we don't, okay? We all may know and have something really great, and we want to share that with people, but we are not above and the autonomy and the agency of our audiences. A few more here. I know we're about out of time. Are we okay here of wrap up with, I'll leave you with these of how are we using guilt or emotional responsibility transfer or ignoring intent to leave. This is the one that the Harvard study is really about. So especially think about this in software design and communication, is that when people have made it clear that they are giving a psychological no, you can't continue to psychologically violate that no or ignore that intent to leave with the constant pop-ups of you're making a huge mistake, or do you really want to leave this? And some of the language in that study, it's really powerful in showing us how we are weaponizing language in some of those ways. So I know we're out of time, so I'll flip through these a little more quickly, but they're there for you to be able to spend time with if you want to learn some more of that language. And really just want to leave you with this concept that now, those of us in marketing and UX, we can't stay uninvolved in these dynamics. We have to know that the way we're using our language, we can unintentionally tune for harm, or we can tune for harmony. There's this effective reckoning that's happening where our audiences are understanding this, and every message, every company, every professional is not just judged by what you say, but what that affect is that you are creating. And the public's affective intelligence is rising. So if we are coding into our language and our systems a lot of these elements, it's really going to be reclassified as something really detrimental. So join us in instead learning how to attune for harmony and be an effectivist for good. So if you would like to connect with me, please do. This is my business card here on this QR code to connect on LinkedIn or any of those types of details. I post and share on this a lot. And thank you all so much for having me.